and many are looking at the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. So we bring in Charles Mitchell, the president and CEO of the Commonwealth Foundation, who, if there's a group of people that know Josh Shapiro, it's the Commonwealth Foundation and Mr. Mitchell. So we welcome you in. Liberty4PA, by the way, is the handle on X. Liberty, the number 4PA. Mr. Mitchell, good morning. The odds that Josh Shapiro would be her number 2 pick. Good morning.
Well, hi, Chris. Great to be with you. And look, I think there's two obvious truths this morning. One is if you're Kamala Harris, Josh Shapiro is a very logical pick. Swing states are what matters. So, if I'm her, I'm looking at the governor of Michigan. I'm looking at the governor of North Carolina. I'm looking at the governor of Pennsylvania. And who's got the highest approval rating? Well, it's Josh Shapiro. The other thing that's obvious, though, is when it comes to what actually matters in terms of people in public office, which is governance, which is accomplishments, Governor Shapiro gets a failing grade. And that's the object of a new analysis that we did at the Commonwealth Foundation on every governor in the country and historic Pennsylvania governors. And by either measure, in terms of actually getting stuff done, which is that's the G-rated version of his motto, as you know, he always talks about GSD. He's a failure in that department. And really, if you think about it this way, he's perfectly qualified for vice president because, as has been said by most vice presidents throughout history, vice presidents don't do anything. So maybe we should all be endorsing him this morning.
You may not be willing to wade into this, and I understand why, because it's pretty sensitive. But we know that there has been a very, very recent spate of very aggressive and high-profile anti-Semitism among Democrats, including on some of his own college campuses in the Commonwealth. There are people saying aloud, like Ari Fleischer, like John King over on CNN. And let me play Ari Fleischer on Laura Ingraham yesterday talking about Josh Shapiro. Take a listen.
Would a Shapiro on that ticket give Kamala a real edge there?
Well, I continue to think most people, almost every voter votes for who's at the top, the president. It's going to be Trump versus Harris. For those who really are focused on who the vice president is, for every marginal pickup you might get in Pennsylvania where somebody votes for Shapiro, that really gives the Harris ticket a big problem in Michigan with the Arab community, where, to put it bluntly, Shapiro's a Jewish candidate, and they have enough problems in Michigan with the Arab vote. So I don't know how that will play. I still think it's essentially a vote for the person at the top and never a vote for the second person.
So look, Charles Mitchell, I can understand, and we get it. Josh Shapiro has been very, very effective and is politically popular in Pennsylvania and may well bring her Pennsylvania. But do they have to consider more than Pennsylvania?
They do, Chris. And look, I'll wade straight into that. OK, that's one of the reasons why, if I'm Kamala Harris, I'm also considering Gretchen Whitmer, because you need both Pennsylvania and Michigan. And yeah, there's questions to be asked about which votes do you pick up and which votes do you lay down. I think what you brought up also reveals some of the deeper realities about Governor Shapiro. I'll give you a perfect example. He got national headlines for condemning the occupation of the University of Pennsylvania. I was actually there on the Penn campus the night that the encampment was put up. The interesting thing is, though, when you really delve into it, he only spoke out. He only called for the encampment to be taken down after he had been privately informed that it was already coming down. That is classic Josh Shapiro. Posturing, but not actually accomplishing anything. And here's one other thing that I would be really worried about if I were the Democratic Party, which, for the record, I'm not. I'm umpire, I'm balls and strikes. I'm not part of either party, as you know, Chris. But here's something I'd be really worried about. The Biden-Harris ticket, which, as we know, is now no more, has been absolutely crashing in urban communities. There's a reason why, as one of the last things Joe Biden did before he stepped down, he came to North Philadelphia, he came to Girard College, because they're concerned about their margins in urban communities, in the black community, and in the brown community. Well, why is that? Well, I think it's because increasingly voters in those communities realize they're getting screwed by the schools in their neighborhoods. They're supposed to be educating their children, but in fact are failing in violent hellholes that politicians like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Josh Shapiro would never send their children to, and in fact do not send their children to. And that's another reason why, if I were Kamala Harris, I might be a little more cautious about Josh Shapiro, because that is the number one campaign promise that he has not only failed to keep, but he has just reversed himself on, which is he ran for office saying he was going to deliver $10,000 scholarships for children in failing and violent schools. Now for 2 years, he's failed to deliver that. So when you're doing the electoral policy, political math, which I understand, you have to do in that business, you should be thinking about what votes do you pick up and lose in Pennsylvania versus Michigan. You should also be thinking about the black and brown and the urban communities where the previous ticket has been losing margins big time. And what are you going to do to get them back? Picking a guy who vetoed scholarships for those students? I don't know. I'd think about it.
And Charles Mitchell at the Commonwealth Foundation, president and CEO there, Liberty 4, the number 4 PA, Liberty 4 PA on X. The Shapiro Harris ticket, Harris Shapiro, they sell them both. I've heard leftists already say, wouldn't that be great? 2 prosecutors going after the convicted felon, which I find hilarious because these 2 prosecutors, she's known for prosecuting black men for, low-level drug crime, and he's known for having one of the most violent couple of cities in the Commonwealth. Pennsylvania, in both Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. Crime, if you want to talk about crime and a record of crime, Josh Shapiro doesn't have one to run on.
Yeah, and that's also another case of where the public hype about Governor Shapiro doesn't match who he actually is. He before becoming Attorney General, he was a career politician and didn't actually have a record of prosecuting cases. And as anybody who lives here knows, when he was Attorney General, he was well known for running towards the television cameras at every opportunity. He and Chuck Schumer could have a contest, I think, for who's more dangerous to stand between them and a TV camera. But look, a real prosecutor, he's not. And of course, he is liable, wholly liable, for the absolutely unspeakable conditions in Philadelphia, which, by the way, our state legislature endeavored while he was Attorney General to give special powers to the Attorney General to supersede the District Attorney of Philadelphia, given that the District Attorney of Philadelphia made it so clear that he has no interest in enforcing the laws. And need I say more about that? And there again, Governor Shapiro didn't do it. That's just part and parcel, unfortunately, of what we've seen over his career, which is he's great at showing up for the photo op. He's one of the masters of TikTok, Instagram, all of it. But the actual work that needs to be done to make people's lives better, he doesn't do it.
Politically speaking, I'm trying to figure out if I'm thinking like him, and it's hard to get into his brain, but he is such a political animal, and he thinks about everything, as you say. He always shows up to lead the parade after it's passed by. So I think he knows. I think we all understand that Kamala Harris, even though she'll have a machine and money behind her to kind of remake her image, at this hour, she's a very unpopular person, more unpopular than Joe Biden. And she's not effective. She's not a great communicator. There's a lot wrong with her. She was first out of the Democrat primary without a single vote ever cast for her. She's been handed everything that she has occupied as an office holder. So I wonder if he calculates, do I want to join? I mean, if she calls him and asks, hey, will you join me? I wonder if he might say no thanks and wait for his turn in 4 years, because he's young enough. He's got to be calculating long term. He's been governor for 2 seconds. So, is he eager to rush to a ticket that might lose? I mean, he can go back to being governor and maybe he weathers it fine, but it doesn't strike me as politically smart for him necessarily.
Well, that's a great question, Chris, because Josh Shapiro, like most politicians, has made it clear that what he's interested in, first and foremost, is himself and his path to the White House. Every decision he makes is made through that lens, and that's nothing uncommon. You and I both have been around this game for a long time. Now, here's how I look at the political incentives for him. This is obviously an unprecedented situation with Kamala Harris and everything, Biden, et cetera. So I think some of the normal rules of politics don't apply. I also think if there's one thing you can say about the leaders of the Democratic Party, it's not that they really care about lowering energy costs for their constituents. Otherwise, they wouldn't be for the Green New Deal. It's not that they actually care about getting people out of failing and violent schools. Otherwise, they, not Donald Trump, would be for universal school choice. That's just a statement of fact. Okay. But they really care about power. And that's why I think you saw Nancy Pelosi push Biden aside as aggressively as she did. And here's what I think their calculus is, and I may offend some of your listeners with this, but it is what it is. I think at this point what the Democrats think is the only person who can lose this presidential election is Donald J. Trump. If he does something stupid, again, he could blow it. Otherwise, they probably think he's going to win. And I think they're making their decisions from that standpoint, which is if they had Biden on the ticket, it doesn't matter what Trump does. Like, people are just fed up. But if they have somebody who's not him, there's a 1% or whatever chance you want to say that Donald Trump just screws this up so royally that he says something or does something that they kind of win by default. But if not, what they're playing for is 2028. And if I'm Josh Shapiro, I look at it that way. This is an opportunity where your party's in crisis, and if you get the call, you're the loyal soldier, you jump in, and, you know, whatever happens, happens. And if they lose, he and Kamala Harris, you're the loyal soldier. You did what you were asked to do. It was a free shot. You didn't lose your governorship. Go back, put your nose to the grindstone, and pick up the pieces in 4 years. And I heard what you were saying earlier, and I understand what you're saying about losers. Look, if you ask me, the number one person who's never going to get another call from Nancy Pelosi if the Democratic ticket loses in 2024 is Kamala Harris if she's at the top of it. I actually don't. I think it's fake news that the Democratic Party actually cares about her. I think they're using her, and they're experts at that. And I think they have no alternative. So it is what it is. I think they're all thinking really about who do we want to elevate for 2028. And I think if you're Josh Shapiro and you're trying to get your path to the White House, it's easy to think, well, if I take the opportunity this year, if I'm asked, maybe I don't push for it too hard. Maybe I'd be happy if Roy Cooper from North Carolina does it. And by the way, if Roy Cooper does it, it's probably his last act in politics because there won't be a Democratic senator from North Carolina in the next 10 years. It's a free shot, and, you know, it maybe increases your chances of being the actual nominee in 2028, which anybody who's observed Governor Shapiro's political career over the last 20 years knows that's what he is after.
Yeah, and I mean, it raises his profile, right? So maybe even a loss, it's his raised national profile, and that's the positive that comes out of it for him, even if they were to lose.
And under these circumstances, right, you could easily say, well, you know, he took a shot. It was a crisis situation.
Yep. No, that's right. I agree with that assessment, actually. I do. It is interesting to me, though, that Pennsylvania Democrats were uniformly behind Biden until yesterday. I think that's really interesting. When so many Democrats were making noise that he's got to step aside, you didn't see one Pennsylvania Democrat of name or note saying so. Don't you find that interesting?
Well, I think what was even more interesting was Senator Fetterman's comments. Sometimes I think he's like the only honest man left in politics. I mean, he's refusing to go along with the program. But but
doesn't that tell you? The reason I bring up Pennsylvania Democrats riding with Biden is it seems to me their calculation is she's more trouble. She's a heavier lift than he was for Pennsylvania Democrats. Is what their calculation was.
No, I think that's totally right, Chris. And look, here's what those two things have in common. Okay, you can make all the noise you want about the Green New Deal and all that BS, but the reality is the broad majority of votes in the Democratic primary are in the middle, and the broad majority of votes in this country, if you want to win the Electoral College, as opposed to just, you know, pile up big margins in California, are in the middle. That's why we have Joe Biden. It's also why we have Josh Shapiro and John Fetterman. They both ran in the same year, and they both talked on the campaign trail as if they were center-right conservatives, and people rewarded them for it. I think that's what these Pennsylvania Democrats know. They're survivors, right? They're surviving politically in a swing state, and they know that if you come across as too extreme to the right or left, you're going to lose in Pennsylvania. And I think that's why so many Pennsylvania Democrats were supportive of President Biden, is they thought he would be the most moderate, most credible candidate, even despite all of his obvious foibles. And, oh, by the way, here's the other thing, we should talk about, right, is if Kamala Harris is at the top of the ticket, how's she going to respond to the questions about her role in covering up what is now so obvious in terms of President Biden's position over the last few years?
Yeah. As I back away from it, Charles Mitchell at the Commonwealth Foundation, it Isn't it amazing how Pennsylvania is in the center of all of these stories? The attempted assassination of Donald Trump, the successful political assassination of Joe Biden, Josh Shapiro. Like, it's all Pennsylvania. Everything, all of this in the last couple of weeks has just centered around the Commonwealth here. It's really quite something. And as Shapiro did write, it was funny. He wrote in this big endorsement of Kamala Harris. He goes, "This is where it all started. This is where the country was born." You know, he went all patriotism and went 1776 on it, which I had to laugh. But we are center stage here in Pennsylvania.
Look, Chris, it is amazing, but it's not surprising. And, you know, for me personally, this is why I left Washington almost 15 years ago and came home to Pennsylvania, where I grew up. Because it didn't take a rocket scientist or even a political scientist to see, especially what was going on in our country at that time, that, but for example, New York, California, some of those states were just, you know, they were one solid color, and that Pennsylvania would soon become the center of the political universe. Now, of course, I abhor some of the ways that, you know, the attempted assassination and all that Pennsylvania has gotten headlines over this last week that I regret. I love Butler, Pennsylvania. I have some dear friends there, and now that, you know, that place is forever associated with something awful. But yes, in general, as you're saying, I think it's amazing but not surprising in any way that Pennsylvania has become the center of the political universe. And my own opinion is we were in 1776, we were in 1789, and we always should be. And part of why I think this discussion that you and I are having this morning that's so important is Pennsylvania is going to have the opportunity to elevate leaders to the national stage. I want us to make sure that the people we're elevating to the national stage don't just say the right things, but actually do the right things on behalf of our country. And that's why my colleagues at the Commonwealth Foundation and I felt it was so important to share with the country the analysis that we did of Governor Shapiro as the least productive governor in the country and the least productive governor in modern Pennsylvania history.
You guys are ready to go with ShapiroRecord.com. You got the website ready, ShapiroRecord.com. You were ready for just such an instance. You guys at the Commonwealth Foundation, you've been a resource to this show for years and years. We're grateful to you, Charles Mitchell, the president and CEO there. Liberty 4, the number 4, Liberty 4 PA on X, ShapiroRecord.com to read up all on Josh Shapiro. And thank you for your time this morning, Charles.
Thanks, Chris. And also check out ShapiroLied.com. That's our newest website.
Oh, wow. You guys are busy. ShapiroLied.com. You're not wasting any time. All right. Thanks, Charles. ShapiroLied.com. I like that.